They never believed they would lose you. That's where their greatest mistake began. Narcissists live inside a delusion, a dangerous fantasy that people are permanent, that no matter what they do, those around them will stay. They move through life assuming they are the center of the universe, convinced that others revolve around them like planets orbiting the sun. They believe their charm, manipulation, and control are enough to keep everyone in place. They never once imagined that the sun, the source of warmth, comfort, and life, could dim. They never thought for a moment that the light you brought into their world could be withdrawn, that your presence, once taken for granted, could disappear entirely. To them, you were not a person with needs, emotions, or boundaries. You were an object, something familiar, reliable, and always available, like a favorite book gathering dust on a forgotten shelf. They assumed you would be there, regardless of how they treated you. They thought no matter the neglect, the disrespect, the emotional chaos, they could always reach for you, and you'd still be waiting. But something shifted, quietly at first, then powerfully. You began to see clearly. You began to ask yourself questions you had once buried. Why am I always the one giving? Why do I feel so invisible? Why does love feel so heavy, so painful? And then one day, it happened. You saw your worth, not just glimpses of it, not just in fleeting moments, but fully. You realized that your kindness wasn't weakness, your patience wasn't foolishness, your love wasn't something to be used up and discarded. You saw yourself not as an extension of someone else's ego, but as a whole worthy, powerful being. And in that moment, without shouting, without confrontation, the balance of power changed. The spell broke. The grip they had on your mind, your heart, your identity began to loosen. They never expected it. They never believed the day would come when you'd stop waiting, stop hoping, stop explaining. But you did. You woke up. And that awakening, the reclaiming of your voice, your strength, your light, was the beginning of the end for them. Because narcissists only thrive when you don't know your value. And now you do. The countdown to their downfall didn't start with a storm. It started with your clarity, you said. They built their world on everything you freely gave: your kindness, your patience, your empathy. You became their emotional anchor, their safe space, their constant, not because they appreciated it, but because they expected it. They fed on your compassion, leaned on your understanding, and took your loyalty for granted. They never questioned how much it cost you to stay. They never paused to consider the weight you carried while holding everything together. They simply assumed you'd never break, never walk away, never stop showing up, no matter how little they gave in return. What they gave you in exchange was confusion, hot and cold behavior, words that twisted the truth, silent treatments, sharp criticisms, subtle jabs that left you doubting your worth. They created chaos and called it passion. They dismissed your pain and labeled it overreaction. They left you questioning your reality while making you feel responsible for every crack in the foundation. And still, you stayed, not because you were weak, but because you believed in love, because you saw the good in them and hoped it would rise to the surface, because you were committed to healing something that was never your burden to fix. But over time, something inside you began to shift. A quiet voice you had long ignored started growing louder. It whispered truths you had pushed away for too long. That love shouldn't feel like this. That being constantly hurt isn't proof of emotional depth. That your feelings are valid, your needs matter, and your heart deserves peace. You started to see the pattern, the way they fed off your pain, how your vulnerability became their advantage, how every apology was a delay, not a change. You realized you were bleeding yourself dry, trying to quench the thirst of someone who was never going to pour anything back into you, and so you stopped. You stopped begging for understanding from someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped chasing apologies that always came too late or never came at all. You stopped shrinking yourself to fit into a space never meant to hold your fullness. You stopped explaining your heart to someone who only saw it as a tool. And then, without a fight, without drama, you walked away. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself more. Ask ChatGPT. A narcissist only begins to recognize your value after you've walked away, when your presence becomes a memory and your silence becomes louder than all the words you ever spoke while you were there, while you were showing up with love, patience, and unwavering loyalty. They treated you like you were disposable. They didn't see your heart. They saw your usefulness. To them, you were predictable, always forgiving, always trying, always staying. Deep down, they never truly believed you'd leave. They believed they had you so tightly wrapped in their web of manipulation and control that you would endure anything just to hold on. They mistook your empathy for weakness, thinking your compassion made you easy to control. They saw your patience and assumed it meant you had no limits. They watched you forgive and interpreted your commitment as permission to hurt you again. They believed that no matter how many times they broke you, you would always come back and try to fix what they shattered. They convinced themselves that your strength was dependence, never realizing that the very things they took advantage of were signs of your depth, not your fragility. But what they never accounted for was the quiet, rising storm within you. The moment your soul whispered, "Enough," it didn't happen all at once. It was a gradual awakening, a slow shedding of illusions. One day you stopped explaining yourself. Then you stopped justifying their behavior. And eventually, you stopped showing up for someone who never showed up for you. You went from begging for crumbs of affection to realizing you could build an entire feast on your own. You discovered that your peace was too valuable to be sacrificed for someone who only brought chaos. And when you left, it wasn't with rage or revenge. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was silent, calm, and sacred. It was yours alone, a decision born from self-respect and clarity. That's what they never expected. Narcissists prepare for fights, for tears, for emotional outbursts. What they don't know how to handle is silence. Your quiet exit forced them to confront something they never wanted to face, the reality that you were the one holding everything together. And now, without your light, they're left in the darkness they created. Too late, they realize you were never weak. You were simply done. Ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT said, "At first, they act like losing you meant nothing. They pretend not to notice your absence, as if your presence was never that important. They might smear your name, replace you quickly, or move on in a way that feels cold and calculated. But make no mistake, this performance isn't strength. It's panic. It's their ego scrambling to stay intact." Narcissists don't process loss like healthy people do. They don't feel the weight of your departure because they miss your soul. They feel it because they've lost their source of emotional supply. You weren't just a partner to them. You were their fuel. You were the constant flow of validation, admiration, and attention they depended on to keep their inflated sense of self alive. Without you, the tank runs dry. And in their desperation, they rush to find a replacement. Someone new, someone unaware, someone who hasn't yet seen behind the mask. They try to recreate what they had with you, believing anyone can fill the void you left. But over time, something begins to unravel. The new person doesn't tolerate the same games. The same manipulation doesn't work. The same control no longer brings the same high. They realize that what they had with you wasn't just about convenience. It was something far deeper, even if they never respected it while they had it. The truth begins to haunt them. You weren't ordinary. You weren't easily replaceable. You were real. You brought warmth, consistency, depth, and a kind of loyalty they never truly earned. You were the light that softened their darkness, the calm in their chaos, the steady in their storm, but they couldn't see it not until it was gone. And now they're left chasing shadows, trying to find a version of you in people who simply won't give the way you did, won't endure what you did, and won't love them through their destruction the way you once tried to. They begin to feel the emptiness more acutely. The silence you left behind grows louder. The attention they once commanded with ease is gone. They remember your patience, your forgiveness, your willingness to see the best in them despite their worst. And for the first time, they realized that what they had in you was rare, was powerful. It was never something they truly deserved. But by the time that truth settles in, you've already moved on to a life where your worth is no longer up for debate. Your energy was the air they breathed without even realizing it. They depended on you to keep them afloat, to stabilize their chaos, to silence their inner emptiness. Your compassion became their hiding place, their refuge from a truth they refused to face, that without someone else to carry the emotional weight, they couldn't survive. You were the one who brought light into their darkness. You made them feel seen, important, even loved while they chipped away at your confidence, made you feel small, made you question your worth. You held space for them even when they gave you every reason to walk away, and they took it all for granted. Now, in your absence, a void follows them. At first, they try to fill it quickly. They search for your reflection in others, hoping someone new will soothe their insecurities the way you did, without conditions, without resistance. But all they find are boundaries they can't manipulate. People who won't give endlessly, who won't carry wounds they didn't cause. And suddenly, the ease they once felt with you is gone. They start to remember. They remember how you forgave betrayals that would have broken most people, how you stood beside them through storms. They created how you listened, supported, and believed in them, even when they made it nearly impossible to. They won't admit it, not to you, not to anyone. But in the quiet moments, when no one else is watching, they feel it. The weight of your absence presses on them like gravity. They feel the difference in their days. They feel the hollowness of conversations that lack your depth, the emptiness of connections that don't hold the same warmth. They feel how cold the world becomes when they are no longer the center of someone's heart. What they miss isn't just your presence. It's the way your presence made them feel. Important, cared for, whole. You gave them a version of themselves they couldn't create on their own. And without you, they're left with the version of themselves they've always tried to avoid, insecure and hollow. Your absence becomes their reckoning, not because they've changed, not because they suddenly understand love, but because the one person who saw beauty in their brokenness is no longer there to blind them from the truth. ChatGPT said they expected the usual response: tears, pleading, a flood of emotions they could twist and use against you. They expected the anger, the desperate texts, the long calls, the late-night arguments. They counted on your pain showing up in the form of attention, because that's how they kept control, by keeping you emotionally engaged, entangled, reactive. Your reactions were their power source. As long as you were explaining, justifying, crying, or yelling, they knew they still mattered to you, that they still had access to your heart. But this time, you did something different. You didn't scream. You didn't argue. You didn't beg for them to understand. You simply went silent. And that silence, it did what no explosion ever could. It shattered the illusion of control they had over you. Not because they missed your words, but because silence is the one thing they can't manipulate. It gives them nothing to latch onto, nothing to spin into guilt, nothing to use against you later. Silence leaves them face to face with what they've spent their entire life running from, the truth of who they really are, when no one is there to carry the weight for them. Your silence became a mirror, a harsh, unrelenting reflection of everything they denied, avoided, and projected onto you. With no words to distort, no arguments to twist, and no reactions to provoke, they were forced to sit in the stillness they once claimed they wanted, but instead of peace, that stillness became their punishment, because in it, they realized something devastating. They don't know how to exist without someone else's energy to feed off. They thought your silence meant indifference, but really, it meant power. It meant growth. It meant healing. It meant that the version of you who once begged for love now demands peace. And peace, to them, is the ultimate betrayal. They don't know how to survive without the chaos, without the push and pull, without the drama that makes them feel relevant. So when you chose silence, you chose yourself. You chose dignity over destruction, clarity over confusion, and most of all, freedom over control. Your silence is not emptiness, it's presence. It speaks volumes. It says, you no longer have access to my energy. And for them, that is the one consequence they never prepared for. ChatGPT said, they'll tell you they miss you. They might say it with tears in their eyes, with words that sound genuine, maybe even with promises of change. But what they truly miss isn't you, it's what you gave them. They miss the supply, the constant stream of attention, validation, affection, and emotional labor you provided without conditions. They miss the way you always picked up the pieces, the way you absorbed their chaos, the way you carried their pain when they couldn't even acknowledge your own. They miss having someone to blame when things went wrong, someone to fix what they continually broke, someone to make them feel like they mattered even when they gave you every reason to walk away. You were their emotional safety net, the one who loved them at their worst, the one who stayed far longer than you should. Not because you were weak, but because you believed in their potential, believed that love could change them, believed that your heart could heal what they refused to face. But it was never really about love for them. It was about control, about feeding their ego, about having someone in their life who would always put them first, even to your own detriment. And now that you've walked away, they feel the withdrawal like an addict craving a fix. Not because they've grown, not because they've become capable of real love, but because they can't survive without the emotional fuel you gave so freely. It's not that they miss the sound of your voice or the essence of your soul. They miss the role you played, the mirror you held up for them, reflecting a better version of themselves. The way your love made them feel important, wanted, admired, Devon, though they never earned it. You gave them an identity they could hide behind. Without you, they are left to face the emptiness they've always carried. And that's the hardest truth to accept. They don't miss you. They miss the version of themselves they were allowed to pretend to be through your love. They miss the illusion, the comfort, the control. But you, the real you, they never took the time to truly know or cherish. And now they never will. Because what they miss isn't a person, it's a supply line that's been permanently cut off. You've grown beyond the version of yourself that once accepted the bare minimum, that tolerated mistreatment disguised as love, that stayed hoping things would change. That version of you, the one who bent, who broke, who carried more than your share, no longer exists. You've healed. You've taken the pieces of what was shattered and rebuilt something stronger, more grounded, more radiant. You've reclaimed your peace, rediscovered your joy, and now know your worth in a way no one can take from you. What once kept you bound, guilt, fear, hope, trauma, no longer holds power over you. You've learned that real love does not demand self-abandonment, that your value isn't defined by someone's inability to recognize it, that suffering is not a prerequisite for connection. You've stopped trying to save people who refuse to save themselves. You've stopped pouring into cups that only drain you in return. And in this new space of wholeness, something powerful has shifted. Your silence has become your boundary, your protection, your declaration of freedom. They may try to come back. They often do. They might arrive with apologies wrapped in carefully, chosen words, with promises of change, with claims that they finally get it. But you know better now. You've learned to separate words from actions. You understand that realization without accountability is just another tactic, manipulation, wearing the mask of remorse. True change is consistent, painful, and humble. And narcissists don't transform because they miss you. They adapt because they miss your usefulness. You were never weak for staying. You were hopeful, loyal, committed. And that says more about your strength than they ever gave you credit for. But your greatest strength was the day you finally chose yourself. The day you walked away from the chaos and into the calm of your own becoming. That's the moment they lost the one person who saw their brokenness and still tried to love them through it. Now, your silence is not emptiness. It's power. It speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. It tells them they no longer own access to your mind, your heart, your life. And while they may remain trapped in their cycles, in their denial, in their need to control, the prison is theirs, not yours. You've moved forward. You're free. And that freedom, that is their greatest loss. Ask ChatGPT.